Business leaders now have the message they need to create value for their customers by transforming their businesses from being organization-centric to customer-centric. The hard part is introducing these changes when these new concepts are not yet fully understood by executives themselves. So that's where Customer Value Creation International can help. CVCI's mission is to educate our members in becoming focused on the customer through alignment of their strategies, culture, and core services. Thank you for participating in our webinar series presented by recognized global leaders. We know you'll benefit from all of our CVCI activities. Now sit back and enjoy your webinar.
Today's webinar is titled Building a Customer-Centric Organization, presented by Colin Shaw, who joins us today from the USA. This is Jim Karras, and I will host today's webinar session. Also, we will have a short Q&A at the end of the webinar. Let me now introduce Colin and ask him to begin his session. Colin?
Hi, Jim. Thanks very much for the invite for being here today, and looking forward to talking to people about building a customer-centric organization. And this is, for us, this is absolutely a vital part of improving your customer experience. I guess all too often what we find is that organizations go about trying to improve their experience by changing, the design of their experiences, by improving things from a customer angle, which is absolutely vital to do. But what they don't do is they don't then look at the causes of those, and many of the causes of those can be internal things. So for us, I wrote a book back in 2004 on the whole area of customer centricity, and that was based on some research that we did, and what we discovered is that all organizations are on a journey from being naive to natural in the way that they're orientated around a customer. And what I'm going to do in this session is I'm going to briefly go through each of these descriptions and explain what each of these orientations are. So people listening to this webinar may want to start to think about, well, is this them? Therefore, what would they have to do to improve, etc. So first thing is that we discovered that there are these 4 orientations. And what we mean by an orientation is it's a bit like if your boss says, can you work late one night? If you're career orientated, you would say, yeah, that's fine. If you are family orientated, then you would probably turn around and say, no, I need to go home and look after the kids, or put the kids to bed, or whatever it may be. Therefore, the issue becomes, it's the same set of circumstances. How does the organization react? And what we've discovered is that there are these 4 orientations: naive, transactional, enlightened, and a natural orientation. I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about each of these and explaining how these lot fit together. So next sort of part of this is that when you're looking at what an organization does, what we've discovered is that there are these 9 areas that affect the customer experience. So again, if you're trying to improve your experience, then that's absolutely fine. That's looking at the customer. But when you're now looking internally, what is it that you need to change as well? And there are these 9 areas that also affect the experience. And these are people. So this is the type of people you recruit, the type of training that you give them, the type of, whether you, how well you treat them, employee engagement, all that type of thing resides in there. Strategy, which is about, how customer focused is your strategy. Some organizations don't even talk about customers in their strategy. Some organizations will have a strategy baked into it. The systems, the IT systems, internal systems, how have those been designed? How are decisions made around, what gets done first? I always remember my personal background is working in corporate life, and I always remember being my last ever meeting in corporate life before I set up Beyond Philosophy back in 2002. We were at this meeting where we were deciding the budgets for next year, and every single cent that we were spending on systems was all about improving internal productivity, and nothing was about the customer. And that again starts to give you signs as to how customer-centric the organization is. Measurement's a key area that drives behavior of employees. What gets measured gets done. We all know that phrase. The channel, which channels people use, and are you restricting channels? Do you just say that you only want customers to come to your website? How you deal with expectations, and what type of expectations that your customers have. The marketing and brand affects the experience. All too often we see marketing offers that customer service don't know a thing about. The processes that have been designed. And finally, and probably most importantly, the culture and the leadership of an organization. And the culture of an organization can affect the excuse me, can affect the experience. Excuse me. The leadership can affect the experience. Now the issue becomes that you can be naive, transactional, enlightened or natural in any one of these phases. So it's ends up a bit like a spider diagram. You could be enlightened on people and on systems be naive. So the first issue becomes, where are you? And if I just go back a slide for a moment, and I guess an important message I want to put over, this is not saying that you have to be customer-centric to make money. There are a number of organizations that I know of who are naive in their nature, and yet they make money. Yeah. In England, there's an airline called Ryanair that's a classic example of that. But the first thing you have to do is you have to turn around and say, where are you today? Which of these areas are you today, and where do you want to be? Okay. And I guess another important part of this is recognizing that a customer experience is not just about rational things. A customer experience is also about emotional and subconscious things. So I don't have too much, we won't be able to get into this entirely today. That may be the subject of another webinar at some point. But rational stuff tends to be what naive and transactional organizations focus on. So, price, place, promotion, all those types of things. The emotional side is what enlightened and natural organizations tend to focus on. Again, this can be a telltale sign of how customer-centric the organization is. So let's go through each of these individually, and let me explain in overall terms what these orientations are. And as I do this, you may just want to think to yourself, where's my organization? And obviously, I don't know, if you're naive, then when we get to transactional, you'll see the types of things that transactional organizations need to do. So, a naive organization is an organization who focuses on themselves. If I had an image to put in your mind, this is the used car salesman. You drive the car off the parking lot, 100 yards up the road, the engine stops, and you take it back and they couldn't care less. They're not interested. and they are what we would call inside out. You know, they just focus on themselves, and they're either doing this because this is a choice, in other words, it's a conscious choice that they're making, or they're doing this because they don't know any different. So the types of traits of these organizations are they're very product focused, they're very reactive to customer demands, they don't measure customer satisfaction. You know, why would they? Because customer satisfaction isn't important. They are delivering a very rational, physically based experience. I go back to that nine orientation and areas, and we looked at employees and people. You know, they're treated very poorly. Very siloed organization, very much focused on, when you look at their KPIs, they're very focused on productivity and efficiency measures. Typically there are no customer KPIs. Typically people are rewarded on commission and productivity and efficiency basis. So, you know, a naive organization is very much about them and nothing about the customer. If I now moved on to transactional organizations, a transactional organization is an organization that is primarily focused on the rational parts of a customer experience. So they've recognized that customers are important. However, that importance is over, you know, basically it's just rudimentary. So many things are left to chance and uncoordinated, and typically, again, they are very reactive to customer demands. So a big difference between transactional or naive and transactional organizations is that they are reactive to customer demands. Enlightened and natural organizations are very proactive towards customer demands. So again, a switch between the two. So back to the transactional organization. So they would say, yeah, we're focused on customers, but you know what, when push comes to shove, then they're not. They still focus on themselves. So, and this is, by the way, the majority of organizations, and in my opinion, it's the majority of organizations, certainly in the US and around Europe. So yes, they have key customer performance indicators, but typically they're very physically, rationally based again. So they're things like, how quickly did we answer the phone, what were the deliveries like. They're looking at those sort of rational, tangible things. They're very functionally organized, and they've recognized, so if you turn around to them and say, hey, do you have customer service? They would say, yeah, we've got customer service, they're over there. And typically those organizations would go, yeah, so customer experience is their issue. And we all know that that's not the case, it's everybody's issue. The call center has typically 800 numbers, but extensive call menus. They're trying to screen out calls. They understand customers' physical, rational expectations, so they understand that a customer wants a delivery to take place within 2 weeks. They understand that what the opening hours of the store should be, but they don't understand those emotional aspects. Typically, senior managers spend a limited amount of time with customers. They don't have a complete view of the systems. They've no defined experience. They're recruiting people with the right attitude, not just the right skill. So some naive organizations typically recruit people with the right, with the right skill. Training takes place on how to deal with difficult customers, but there's no soft skills training, or not very much soft skills training. A typical case would be, and again this happens to me regularly, when we do assessments of organizations using this stuff, we would say, well, how much training do the people in the call center get? And they'd say, oh, they get 6 weeks training. Okay, that's great. So how much of that is systems and how much of that is customers. Oh, well, it's, it's only half a day on customers, the rest of it is on systems and processes. So again, that starts to give you an idea that you're dealing with a transactional organization. And employees are given limited authority. There's no empowerment. And this, for me, it's much more detailed than this. This is trying to give you an overview. This, for me, is a typical organization in the States that you would deal with, or in Europe that you would deal with. So we now move on to enlightened organizations. Okay, now this is where a change has taken place. And the change is twofold. First of all, these organizations tend to be more proactive. So they've recognized the need for a more holistic and coordinated approach to a customer experience. So they've suddenly gone, hey, our customer experience is disjointed, it's uncoordinated, as we saw with the transactional side. We need to create a deliberate experience, and deliberate is a very important word. Deliberate means that you've deliberated over it. It means that you've thought about it. These organizations are more proactive, as we've said, and the other key change here between transactional and enlightened organizations is that they've recognized that customers are people, and customers are driven by emotions. And therefore, they are looking to orchestrate and design emotionally engaging experiences. And part of that is, therefore, they know which emotions they're trying to evoke. And going back to what I said before, which is, over 50% of an experience is how a customer feels, then clearly the question becomes, well, what emotions should we be evoking in our customers? So they've designed defined a customer experience. They understand customers' emotional expectations, not just the rational expectations. They understand how a customer wants to feel. They've defined which emotions that they're going to start to stimulate. They're starting to use experience psychology, so understanding, again, that human aspect of things. They've now realized, and going back to sort of employee engagement, that the employee experience and the customer experience is important, and therefore there's a connection there, and we need to connect the two. They're looking to employ people with emotional capabilities, so they're using emotional intelligence tests, those types of things, to select people. They're looking at the whole of the end-to-end experience. Typically, these organizations have got somebody senior in the organization who's a vice president of customer experience. They've got a more integrated view of the experience, and they start to measure and bonus people based upon that experience. So these are the enlightened organizations. The last one is then the natural organizations. And we call it a natural organization because it is natural, because this is what the organization does. So here's the irony. These organizations do not have a vice president of customer experience. They don't need one. They don't need that focus, because this is inbuilt within the organization. And these only account for 2 to 5% of organizations, basically. So a natural organization is where the focus on the customer is total. They're very, very proactive towards customer. They are anticipating customers' needs, and they're looking at that whole holistic experience. And they now are looking at this whole area of experience psychology in a much greater depth. So they're looking to produce memorable and captivating experiences. Okay, and they know, therefore, that senses. They know that smell, taste, touch help evoke emotions, and they design those things deliberately into their experience. And they are looking at what we would call this subconscious experience. And again, I could spend 4 hours just talking about the subconscious experience, but very briefly, a subconscious experiences are those hidden messages that we get. You know, typically in a transactional organization, you go into a bank and they put pens on chains, and that says, we don't trust you. So, traits of these organizations, they're completely customer focused, it's in their DNA. They recognize that people don't choose between experiences, but they choose between the memory of an experience, and that's a really key thing, and you know, something I think you need to think about. And again, I could spend 4 hours talking about that. But they're choosing between memories of experiences rather than experiences. They understand that there's this subconscious experience. They've designed a deliberate experience. They are now have recognized that they are that the culture of the organization needs to be aligned to the experience. They are consciously using senses, so you know, they're building in smells, music, taste, touch into that experience. They've recognized, and sort of, although the organization still may be siloed, that the approach to the customer shouldn't be. And journey maps, you know, transactional organizations do journey maps, but transactional organizations do journey maps from a rational perspective. Natural organizations would be doing journey maps that include emotional, subconscious, and psychological perspectives. And when we look at that, and you know, we look at those 4 elements of that experience. So, if you're looking to build a customer-centric organization, you know, the first step is going, where are you? Are you naive, transactional, enlightened, and natural? And second key question is, where do you want to be? So, you know, is it natural? Is it enlightened? You know, is it transactional? Because these are the types of things that you would need to change to help build that. So Jim, that's the end of the session. I'm not sure if you want to run any questions or.
Yeah, thanks, Colin, for sharing really some really great thoughts. A lot of the topics you mentioned have a lot of depth to them, and I hope maybe we can visit with some other webinars to drill down a little bit. Yeah, I do have a couple of questions about how companies can become customer-centric. You touched on it a couple of 3 times, but maybe just to crisply say, you know, what's the hardest part of companies increasing the customer-centric maturity model? And also, how do they know what level of that maturity model they really need to be at?
Good question. So the hardest part is just the cultural aspects. So getting the culture and the leadership right. Many organizations that we work with would say that they want to improve their customer experience, or they want to focus on the customer. But then when you tell them what they need to do, then they you know, that's when you get the resistance. So getting the leadership in place, getting the leadership to buy into the changes that need to be made, getting the culture of the organization to embrace the customer, and again the changes that need to be made is probably the most difficult thing to do. And we spend lots of time trying to prove to leadership how improving the experience will drive value and give a return to the organization. You know, once you've got them on board with that type of work, then you can start to move down in the organization and get other parts of the organization to improve things. But that's probably the most difficult part, Jim.
Okay. Well, you know, and also today in companies, there's a lot of customer-centric KPIs that aren't being collected that should be collected, even at the lowest level of the maturity model. What are a couple of the most critical KPIs at the lower level of the maturity model that you think are important?
I like things like Net Promoter. I like things like customer effort score. You know, for us, I've said it a couple of times here. Once you've designed your, you know, if I was to say to the listeners, what's the experience you're trying to deliver? Can you articulate it? And most people can't. But once you can, if you're trying to get customers to trust you or care for you, those are the things that you should be trying to measure. And those should then be cascaded throughout the entire organization. I don't think I'm not a believer that the Net Promoter is the answer to life, the universe, and everything. I think it's a good measure to have, but it's just one of a composite of measures that you need to put in place.
One last question I do have, and this is a little bit about CVCI as an association also, but how do you see CVCI as an enabler for companies and professionals wanting to address the total maturity transformation?
I think it's a great enabler. I think it really is a great enabler, because what you get is you get a group of like-minded people. All too often, and when I was in corporate life, I actually joined an association because I felt that it was actually quite lonely. I didn't have people, all the people listening to this call will be evangelists of improving the experience and creating better value for customers. The trouble is that all the people on this call as well will probably be hitting their head against the wall because not everyone in their organization is the same. Therefore, being able to meet up, talk to, get ideas from like-minded people, I think is absolutely essential. I'm also a great believer that there's nothing new under the sun. Somebody somewhere has had the same problem as you have and has solved it. It's just a question of finding it and getting to understand it. So I think this is a great way of sharing and helping resolve issues that you've got.
Well, Colin, again, thanks again on behalf of CVCI and also those listening to the session, for sharing your excellent webinar. We hope everyone online will visit CVCI and view other sessions. We'll see you at another CVCI webinar. So for now, goodbye, and we'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.